these things that have gone before were the talk of the country. Wherever you went, you heard of misery and want. The Luddites had the approval of the people. Not, of course, everybody, but the working man, even those whose own handicraft was not threatened by the new frames, favoured the Luddites. I do not know how it came about, but I was soon made aware that I was well regarded. When I went to chapel at Powell, people made way for me as though I was somebody. For me, I hated most genuinely the secrecy and underhandedness of the thing. I dreaded meeting my cousin George, but I knew it had to be done. My mind was fully made up to tell him I could not continue by his side on this organised attack on machines. The objection to machinery was that it displaced human labour. Well, I argued, a scythe is a machine, so is a pair of scissors. If I propose to do away with the scythe at hay time and clip our 3-acre field with my mother's scissors, everyone will think me a lunatic. But somehow, as I walked down to the brig to have my talk with George, I got less and less comfort from my logic the nearer I grew to Huddersfield. George was at home, in a towering rage. I could not have found a worse time for my errand.
You're just the man I wanted to see, Ben. I feel I must talk to somebody and let steam off a bit.
Whatever's up, George? Do sit down and talk quiet and sensible. One would think you'd lost your wits, and I particularly wanted a quiet talk.
Listen here. I'd been up to Linfit, and we're coming along the road back to the cropping shop. I'm just above the Warren House by Radcliffe's plantation when I saw a woman about 30 years old crouched against the wall. I could see a pair of men's shoes sticking out from underneath her skirt, and it's my belief she'd nowt on her but just that shirt and an old thin black shawl. She was crying and moaning and rocking herself to and fro, and she'd a bundle of something in her arms. I didn't know her, but I stopped to see what ailed her. She'd been down to Huddersfield to see the relieving officer. Her husband was a cropper. He'd been thrown out of work. His master had put in 2 frames, so he'd had to leave. He's down with the rheumatic fever. They'd nowt to eat or drink. She'd been suckling the baby, and as time went on, she'd no milk in her breast for the little un. She'd fed it for days by soaking a rag with warm milk and water and let it suck on that. And then it had the convulsions, and she'd had to leave her man raving with the fever and hug the brat to Huddersfield, and there they had nowt for her. She opened her shawl, and as I'm a living man, there were the little one with a head no bigger than my fist, stark dead at its mother's breast. It made my heart stand still, and I felt as if a strong man were clutching my throat. I stood there before her mute. Just then I heard the sound of a horse's trot, and I turned round and there were a horseful of Ottywells coming up the road. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed the child from its mother's arms and stepped right in front of his horse. He swerved and he swayed in the saddle.
Damn you! Mind where you're walking! Stand aside and leave the road free, you drunken tramp!
I stood in front of his horse and held up the child above the horse's head, and I thrust it right in his face. I said, "Look at thy work, William Horsfall, look at thy work and be glad."
Out of my way, you villain!
And then he drew his mare up onto its haunches and lifted his stock high in the air and brought it down with all his might, right across my face. Then he dug his spur into the mare and sprang off with a bound up the road.
I've marked you, George Miller. I've marked you, and you know for what you are. You've not heard the last of this.
But I care nothing for what he said. I gave the wee body back to its mother and all the brass I had on me. As the Lord's above me, that blow shall cost William Horsfall dear.
You won't like my errand, George, but I've settled to tell you, and tell you what's on my mind.
Well, what is it, lad? I'm easier now, I've had me say.
You know what's fixed for next Saturday?
I do that, Ben, and all goes well with that. I've had word that a big force from Leeds will join us near Rolfolds, and some will be there from Bradford and Dewsbury. The movement's spreading, lad. It's spreading and it's growing, and the time's at hand when General Ludd will have an army that'll sweep all before it.
I shall be there, George.
Of course you will, Ben. You must lead the hammer men. Those doors of Cartwright's will stand some braying, but you can splinter his panels and burst his locks, I'm thinking.
I will be there, George, for my word's passed. But after that night, you must do without me.
You'll not turn tail, Ben. Why, the Visory's at hand, man. One blow and the game's our own.
I'm no traitor, George, but it hurts me to tell thee. I know what you say about the suffering of the poor, but we're on a wrong tack, George. Enoch's not going to stop machinery. The masters are stubborn. We may break 1,000 frames and clear every machine out of every mill and shop in England, but better ones will take their place. We cannot go on forever with midnight raids and secret meetings. The law's too strong for us, George.
Then what would you do, Ben? Are the working classes to sit down and watch their families die by inches? If you don't like my methods, tell me better. I don't like stealing about like a thief any more than you do. But this is only the beginning, Ben, only the beginning.
And the end?
We'll strike higher and further. Before many weeks are over, I'll throw off all disguise. I'll call on every man that has a heart to join me, and we'll march with swelling ranks till we stand an army at the very gates of Westminster. And there we will thunder for our claims and wring from an abject parliament the rights without which we are driven slaves.
And have you counted the cost, George?
Aye, that I have. If we succeed, who can tell what we may not accomplish? These cruel, lagging wars that keep corn beyond our reach and are useful only to find riches and glory for the ruling families of the land shall finish. The toiling masses of England shall clasp in friendship the hand of the uprisen people of France. We will drive from office and power those lords and landowners who for centuries have used the resources of this country, wrung from the helpless taxpayer as their own privy purse. We will establish a parliament in which the poor man's voice will be heard. And if we fail, why then, Ben, we will have died in a glorious cause, and George Mellor, for one, would rather shed his blood in such a cause than sit mute and consenting, a crushed and heartless unit of a people hugging its own chains.
I'm with you, George, in an open fight, though I seem to feel a rope around my neck as I say it. But for heaven's sake, George, get into the open as soon as you can. For I've forgotten how to hold up my head. But you convinced me, George. I came to get out of a conspiracy, but you've nobbut pledged me to rebellion. But at least I've my own self-respect, and that's something gained.
Spoken like your own self, Ben. Now, let's talk of Saturday night and no looking back.
It was almost 10 o'clock of the Saturday night when I left the house on tiptoe. I opened the door and strode off down the hill. I met not a soul till I came to Kitchen Fold, and here, by the Black Bull, was Soldier Jack. He handed me a huge sledgehammer and showed me a pistol that he himself was to handle. We walked briskly towards Huddersfield. Jack was very still. As we neared the spot, we saw other figures moving quickly in the same direction. Some were dressed in smocks, and all had their faces part concealed. When we got near the steeple, I put on my mask and Jack his. From all sides, across fields, down byways, from Robert Town, from High Town, men, singly and in small groups, were gathering. All were curiously still. So I gave a start when a slim form moved by my side, sprung from I don't know where, and John Booth's voice whispered.
I know you by your height, Ben, and the swing of your gait, and Soldier Jack isn't hard to tell with his limp. But here we are by the steeple, and here comes our leader.
Look at us. We shall make a brave show, and Soldier Jack. Those lads from Leeds will know what it means to have a soldier to smarten us up.
George, let us go and check how each is armed.
Ben, we've a good half hour to wait here before we start. There are not above 100 of us here, all told, and we counted on 5 times that number. The Leeds men will meet us, or should meet us near Rawfolds. But Bradford and Dewsbury have sent a mere handful of those that should have come. George is putting a brave face on, but he's so vexed all the same.
We've enough for the job. If 100 cannot force Rawfolds, 1,000 cannot. We'll do well to start to know our luck.
This is my last venture, Ben.
And mine too, by moonlight. Daylight or night, I say.
There will be sharp work at Rawfolds. The mill is well garrisoned. Cartwright is a bold, resolute man. He will defend his machines at any hazard and any cost. There will be bloodshed. There must be bloodshed. Something tells me my days are numbered.
You're just talking daft.
If I don't come back to Huddersfield with you, Ben, you'll find a paper at Mrs. Wright's telling you what to do with my things. It'll be you to tell my father and Faith. No one else must do it. Promise me that.
You'll not fall, John. Stick as close to me as you can get. When we come to the mill, I'll see nobody touches you, if I can help it.
Do you like Faith, Ben? I've thought of late that she turns to you and seems to lean on your strength. You'll stand by her, won't you, if the worst comes to the worst? Promise me, Ben. Ben, pledge me this promise, and I'll go to this night's work with a lighter heart.
If it will lighten thee and help thee to play the man this night, there's my hand on it. Now put this nonsense from your head, stick close to me all through, and when this is over, make straight for me or Soldier Jack, and we'll win home together. Come then, man. Our work is ready for us.
George and Thorpe and Soldier Jack were forming the party into companies. There looked to be some 200 of us. Jack arranged us in the order deemed best. We were drawn up in a long line close by the steeple. The men of the first company had pistols or muskets or firearms of any sort. They were to march first. Behind the shooters, drawn up, 2 abreast, were the hatchet men. And behind them were to march my own lads, about a score of us, big men all of us, and each of us slung a hammer over his shoulder. I was captain of the hammer men, and on my shoulder I bore a mighty weapon that few could sling. Behind my company was more or less a rabble, men unarmed or with bludgeons only. What good they were, or expected to be, it would puzzle me to say. They were Ludds, and that was enough.
Now, lads, we've 3 good miles to Rawfolds, and the night's getting shorter. Before day breaks, our work must be done. Show yourselves men but this night, and you will bring the masters to their knees. You fight for home and hearth and the right to live. If there is one among you whose heart fails him, let him step out and leave us. And now, men, ready? Forward!
George placed himself at the head of the column, and we moved steadily on in the dark, glad of the motion, for our blood was chilled with standing. And I, for one, thought less when I was moving, and the less I thought, the better it suited me. John Booth was in the rear, for he could use neither axe nor hammer, and pistols he would have nought to do with. Every now and then George ran past me on his way down the ranks, and I could see his eyes lit up with fire, for he had lost or thrown away his mask. It was near the White Hart Inn, and we were to be joined by the Leeds men, so we halted to wait for them.
Do you know where the soldiers are billeted?
Aye, mostly Hague House in Huyton.
Hadn't we better send a party to engage 'em and cut 'em off?
There's more at Millbridge. They're all around us. If you try to stop one lot coming, why not another?
There's somewhat in that. Anyway, we mustn't stop. They're shivering here. You must keep 'em moving, General. There's nowt many's worse than waiting in the dark. They get scared of their own shadows and start at their own thoughts. Push us forward, George, and let us get to close quarters, for every minute wasted now means a deserter.
Right you are, soldier. I've noticed more than one slinking off, but I thought it best not to say out.
Then forward, men. If the Leeds men miss it, all the more glory will be ours. Now forward, and no more lagging.
We moved on again, turning sharply down the lane that led from the moor towards the mill. We could see the buildings now. The mill itself, 4 stories high,